Hey there, it's Brennan here again, talking about my top albums of the year 2002, which so far in the decade of the 2000s, I think is the strongest year, slightly stronger for releases than 2000 and 2001. My favorite album of that year would be The Odyssey by Symphony X. They also took my top spot in the year 2000, so congrats to them for taking my top spot in 2 years so far. I haven't thought ahead far enough yet to know if they're going to take my top spot a third time. Maybe they will. They released great stuff after this as well. This is top-notch progressive metal. They really stepped up their game since their last album, the New Mythology Suite. The Odyssey closes with 24-minute epic, the title track, which has a lot of classical and film music influences, as well as prog and metal thrown in there, and it really takes you on a journey. This is actually the first Symphony X album that I heard, and this is what got me into the band. My second album of 2002, second favorite, is Deliverance by Opeth, following up their last two masterpiece albums, Blackwater Park and Still Life. People might have been wondering, can they do it again? Can they put out another masterpiece album? And I think they were able to successfully outdo themselves again and keep this string of amazing progressive death metal masterpieces going. My third favorite album of the year 2002 is Between the Buried and Me, their self-titled debut. They are one of my all-time favorite bands, so I'm sure we'll hear about them again in this video series. This is their very first album. They hadn't quite found their optimal sound yet, in my opinion, but everything they put out is great, so this is still a solid progressive metalcore album with death metal influences. Now let's do some honorable mentions. Lots to mention this time because there were so many good ones to choose from, so I'll say a bunch of them here. 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence by Dream Theater, one of the biggest and greatest progressive metal bands. The Illusion of Safety by Thrice. It's Thrice's second album. They're a top-notch post-hardcore band who changed their sound so many times over the years. They've dabbled in all sorts of different styles and sounds. Steal This Album by System of a Down, the alternative metal giants. There's a Story to This Moral by Choke, a really underrated Canadian band, maybe my favorite punk rock band ever. They're like technical progressive punk music. And then there's an album, I don't even know how you would say it, it's just 2 brackets, by Sigur Rós, the Icelandic post-rock band. They're one of the few bands with non-English lyrics that I listen to often. Very soft, ambient, and beautiful. And last honorable mention will be In Absentia by Porcupine Tree. It's progressive rock with a hint of metal in there. But none of the albums that I mentioned so far were my favorites at the time in 2002 when I was 11, turning 12 in December that year. What was I listening to at the time? I think my favorites were Let Go by Avril Lavigne, her 2002 debut album. Definitely a fan of that pop punk style at the time, because the other one of my favorites from that year was another pop punk album, No Pads, No Helmets, Just Balls by Simple Plan. Those two albums are still both kind of guilty pleasures for me because I can still remember the nostalgia of that year. And then another one that came out that I got into maybe much later in the year, when I started actually getting into rap and I got into Eminem. It was the Eminem Show from 2002, and pretty much once I started listening to that, I got really into Eminem. He was probably my favorite for at least a year. Yeah, so that's what I was listening to around that time. What were your favorites from 2002. What are your favorites now, and what were your favorites then?